better.
Hey there guys, this is your host Richard with another marvelous video. So, it's not a secret that the Star Wars franchise has been struggling a bit lately. Don't get us wrong, the franchise is still a cultural juggernaut, but for some reason, its recent outings on the silver screen have been a bit underwhelming. However, one aspect of the saga we fans don't talk about enough is the stellar work Disney's been doing on the animated front. Just when Bad Batch's ending had us craving more animated shows from the galaxy far, far away, they gave us this small gem, and to be honest, it holds up for the most part. With a name like Tales from the Empire, one can also be confident that this time we'll be leaning a bit more into the darker side of things, pun intended. But before we kick into hyperdrive, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It might just be a small click for you, but to us, it means an awful lot. With that out of the way, please turn on your lightsabers, because here we go. The Tale of Morgan Elsbeth. Tales from the Empire is essentially a 6-part anthology that consists of small personal tales removed from the main storyline, filled with Skywalkers and Solos. It sheds light on some of the more underdeveloped aspects of the Star Wars universe, much like its predecessor, Tales from the Jedi. The show is produced by veteran creator Dave Filoni, who at this point has probably been involved with more Star Wars projects than Lucas himself. Since Filoni has such an impressive body of work in the world of Star Wars, it's obvious that there are certain specific minor characters that have drawn his interest. In the case of the Tales of anthologies, it definitely seems like an attempt on the part of Filoni to provide answers to long-standing questions about characters who are unlikely to get an entire trilogy centered around them. And after witnessing the heart-wrenching stories the team was able to tell about Ahsoka and Count Dooku, we're all in for this ride. Now, Filoni changes the formula a bit. Instead of casting fan-favorite characters like Ahsoka and Dooku as the protagonists, the team switched it by making the relatively unknown Morgan Elsbeth and Barriss the central figures in the story. Morgan Elsbeth first appeared in The Mandalorian, where she was serving as the magistrate of Calodan on the planet Corvus. But the short anthology takes us way back in time to witness the dreadful experiences that shaped this ferocious bureaucrat's worldview. I mean, anyone who can hold their own against Ahsoka Tano in hand-to-hand combat has gotta be a badass, and Tales of Empire is just further evidence of this fact. Our other protagonist, Barriss is the Marillion apprentice of Luminara Unduli. She's one of the most intriguing figures in the Star Wars saga, especially because she started out as a Jedi who had just turned to the dark side. It's quite reminiscent of a certain masked guy who breathes really heavily and is fond of force-choking fools. We first saw her in the film Star Wars Episode II, Attack of the Clones, where she ended up being sent to prison for blowing up a Jedi temple. The series divides its time evenly between these two characters, dedicating the first 3 installments to Morgan, while the last 3 shorts are dedicated to Barriss. For Filoni, the paths these characters walk on might be parallel, but there are definitely some themes and ideas that are shared between the two of them. More importantly, the show is basically about the decisions these two characters make, as well as the consequences of these decisions on their own lives and the galaxy in general. The first short, titled The Path of Fear, is basically the origin of Morgan Elsbeth. From the very first frame, it becomes evident that this is going to be a gritty, brutal affair. On the planet of Dathomir, home to the famous coven of witches known as the Night Sisters, a terrible battle rages on. Actually, it's not as much of a battle as it is a complete massacre. We find the Night Sisters under siege by none other than Grievous and his deadly forces. The forest burns as laser shots light up the night sky. We see a young Morgan struggling to fend off the horde of droids, but she's saved at the very last moment by her mother, Selena. Selena, an adept warrior herself, wields 2 enchanted sickles, but these are of little use against the Grievous. I mean, having 4 arms in a sword fight has to count as cheating. But come on, the guy is literally called Grievous. Morgan ends up being one of the only survivors of the brutal hunt and has to watch her mother die in front of her eyes. That's of course enough to fill anyone with revenge, and we soon see Morgan turn toward this path throughout the rest of the episode. After the battle, Morgan finds refuge with a mountain clan of Night Sisters, whose leader, Matron, asks Morgan to join them, but the youngster is still reeling from the events of the battle and can only find solace in the company of Nali, the matron's daughter. Together, the 2 women head into the wilderness to hunt when, out of nowhere, a droid ship encounters them. They manage to hide, but it's evident that Morgan is completely afraid of Grievous's forces by this time. Nali alerts the matron, but the motherly figure decides that the droid shouldn't be interfered with. Unhappy with this call, Morgan and Nali lead some women from the mountain clan to an old bunker from Morgan's old clan. But of course, the droids are not far behind, and a swarm of droids soon descend into the forest. In the brief confrontation that follows, it's clear that the mountain clan aren't the best fighters ever, and the sisters suffer quite a lot of damage. They'd have definitely lost if the matron hadn't teleported to the spot and saved them using a handy magical EMP that knocked the droids off. But in the process, Nali loses her life, breathing her last in her mother's arms. In the end, the matron recognizes that Morgan has been completely consumed by her hatred and is forced to turn her away from the clan. The next time we see Morgan is in the episode The Path of Anger. This episode basically sets up the story that unfolds in Ahsoka, beginning years after the first installment of the anthology. Morgan's become a magistrate by this point and is kind of obsessed with her idea about TIE defenders, which were like Thrawn's main project in Star Wars Rebels. So anyway, Morgan wants to build these ships on the planet of Corvus, where that beautiful battle took place in the Season 2 Mandalorian episode, The Jedi. See, we told you, it all ties up together. The thought of all the untapped resources on Corvus gets the Imperial officers pretty hyped, but Gilad Pellaeon, Thrawn's underling, remains resistant. Later, we find that the population on Corvus is growing pretty pissed off at Morgan for deceiving them into believing that work would come to their planet. Morgan retreats to her compound at her gate, but the attack actually comes from somewhere else. From the shadows, Rook, the Negri bodyguard employed by Thrawn, pounces upon her, and they obviously decide to fight it out. Morgan wins the duel, forcing Pellaeon to reveal himself and confess that this was all a test to see if Morgan could be a competent leader. At the end of the episode, Thrawn sanctions Morgan's project to build TIE defenders on Corvus, which is just a fancy way of saying that the whole thing now belongs to the Empire. In the third episode, Path of Hate, we see how much Corvus has changed due to Morgan's plans and actions. A dystopian hellscape stripped of all its natural resources, a shell of its former self. Meanwhile, the Empire was taken over by the New Republic, which aimed to restore peace to the galaxy. But as we all know by now, that's easier said than done. The Republic's emissary to Corvus is Nadura, a native herself. Nadura soon realizes that the inhabitants of Corvus are completely unaware of the Empire's defeat and that Morgan has basically turned them into slaves forced to work endlessly without food or water. Nadura confronts Morgan and proposes the inclusion of Corvus into the Senate, which would require Morgan to step down from her position. But, well, if there's one thing that dictators completely suck at, it's their ability to give up power. So, well, Morgan proceeds to send an endless horde of droids after Nadura while completely setting Corvus's landscape on fire. This is a clear statement to all the occupants of the dying planet. There's no saving them as long as Morgan is around. And truly, we'd have to wait for the Mandalorian and his ward Grogu to appear before this particular problem sorted itself out.
Now I feel your anger.
The tale of Barriss Offee. From the fourth episode onward, the story switches gears and instead focuses on Barriss Offee and her exploits around the galaxy. As an excommunicated Jedi, Barriss isn't really the nicest person, and it becomes all the more evident in the first episode titled Devoted. The story begins with Lyn Rakish offering the disgraced Jedi a chance to change the course of her life. Lyn introduces Offee to the Grand Inquisitor, the leader of a group of assassins tasked with hunting down the surviving Jedi after Order 66 was put into effect. Here, Barriss also encounters Armor and Dante, two individuals also known for betraying the Jedi. But Armor is sorta nervous, and thus he begins to suspect foul play. Now, entering an assassin's lair and questioning their motives isn't really a smart move, and the poor guy ends up getting killed by the Grand Inquisitor. In the following days, the Grand Inquisitor trains Offee into an able assassin, leading to the final test where she and Dante have to fight to the death. Offee wins, of course, and is introduced to her new master. And guess who that might be? Well, he's none other than the original Jedi turncoat, Darth Vader himself. Cue the Imperial March. Episode 5 begins with Lyn and Offee tracking an underground Jedi hiding on a remote planet. The orders are clear: find the Jedi and kill him. However, Offee begins to hesitate and even questions whether this particular Jedi was involved in a plot to assassinate Palpatine. But Lyn pressures her into moving on with their mission. The planet they're seeking turns out to be a pile of desolate ruins, with poverty and starvation plaguing the entire population. After several attempts, Barriss finally finds a lead that hints at a Jedi hiding in the forest. In a fit of rage, Lyn massacres the entire village with her extremely cool spinning lightsaber. But yeah, it's a despicable act nonetheless. This unsettles even Offee, and the two begin to argue on their way to the Jedi. It's here that we see Barriss reveal some of her humanistic side, clearly showing disdain for Lyn's brutal acts and even pleading with her to spare the Jedi once they apprehend him. But Lyn's hatred is far too deep, and the violence perpetuated by her is enough to convince Barriss to leave the Inquisitors. In the last moments of the episode, Lyn pounces at Offee, but in total surprise, our protagonist blasts the murderer off the cliff. So, it at least seems like Barriss is beginning to find her way to the light, even though a greater challenge awaits. The final episode takes place about 6 years after Barriss defected from the Inquisitors. We're first introduced to a couple desperately seeking someone known as the Healer, as their newborn is Force-sensitive. Now, the Empire doesn't like magical wizards that could potentially overthrow them, which is why everyone connected to the Force is eliminated indiscriminately. Thus, the baby's parents are forced to hide on the remote planet, looking for the Healer who could help them. The mysterious Healer is none other than Barriss Offee, who's completely taken up her role as a Jedi and vows to take care of their child. Soon, she learns that a stranger is approaching their hideout, and well, who else could it be but the fourth sister, Lynn Rakish. Lynn, after surviving her last battle with Barriss, seems to be even more powerful. But Barriss, with all her experience, easily evades Lynn's attacks. Offie seems to have grown even better at using her Jedi powers and warns Lynn from entering the cave where the baby and her followers are hiding. Lynn, always the headstrong kind, proceeds to enter the caverns and immediately finds herself lost in the endless labyrinths. Barriss tries to rescue her, promising to set Lynn free if she just sets down her weapon, but this just frustrates the Inquisitor more. She lashes out, and the wildly swinging lightsaber accidentally impales Barriss. The wound is fatal, but before Barriss dies, she persuades Lynn to abandon her role as an Inquisitor. In the last images of the episode, we see a weary Lynn exit the caverns with Barriss's body. Now, that's a complicated relationship, to say the least, but we couldn't be more grateful that Lynn managed to see the light by the end of this story. What's gonna happen next? So, this might probably be one of those rare scenarios where the show does kinda have a definitive end, at least with respect to its protagonists. We already know what happened to Morgan after the end of the series. She'd remain in complete control of Corvus until the events of The Mandalorian, where she was finally dethroned. She'd eventually get slain by her arch-nemesis Ahsoka on Peridea, but not before he helped her allies escape from the planet with Chimera. Certainly, Morgan's path had always led to her own self-destruction, and even though we can all agree that what happened on Dathomir was terrible, she did the same to countless other civilizations. So, even if we don't see her again in the Star Wars saga, well, good riddance, I guess. As for Barriss, her death seems pretty final, like she literally used her dying breaths to guide her friend away from the dark side. So, a reincarnation might just make the whole thing pointless. Still, it's Star Wars, and we're certain there's some Jedi skill somewhere that can bring back this fan favorite, and one can never forget those Force ghosts that make appearances post-death kinda convenient, but we'll have to wait a while to see if this goes anywhere. Marvelous Verdict's Tales of the Empire depicts two tales that are entirely opposite to each other. Morgan's story leads her to the very depths of darkness, making her irredeemable, while Barriss rises from these very depths and finds her way to the light. Their arcs could be considered mirror images of each other, and are clear testaments to how revenge and malice can mutilate a man's soul. But what do you think? Does this addition to the Star Wars storied saga do the epic justice? Please let us know in the comments below. Oh, and also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to stay up to date with the rest of our marvelous videos. That's it for today, and we'll catch you all in the next one.